to the Metal Church. Bloody Roots. Reverend Ian Christie is about to begin. Bloody Roots. Please turn to page 666.
From the pages of Hound of the Beast, your weekly heavy metal history lesson with Ian Christie.
Hi, it's Ian Christie. Welcome to Roots of Funk Metal. A full hour of brightly colored, bouncing off the wall, space-slapping, metal-infused shenanigans by the likes of Scatterbrain, Primus, Mr. Bungle, Faith No More, Mordred, Scat Opera, 24/7 Spies, Funkadelic, The Mighty Exodus. This is Venice, California's own Infectious Grooves. You are listening to Roots of Funk Metal on SiriusXM. Monster Skank, a big, massive amount of funk metal out of Venice, California, featuring Mike Muir and Rob Trujillo from Suicidal Tendencies. Trujillo, of course, the longtime bass player in Metallica. Adam Siegel on guitar from the excellent Venice band Excel. And originally, Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction. Welcome to Roots of Funk Metal. What are we doing? We're having fun. This is a look at the phenomenon that raged from about 1987 to 1993 or so, and in some ways never really went away. The groove of thrash metal evolving to a point that people started to look around them and see what was happening in rap music, in alternative music with bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, looking to 1970s funk with brightly colored costumes and silly, ridiculous songwriting based on these popping grooves and hyperactive popcorn bass slaps. This is now one of the most mocked, formerly huge metal subgenres. And today we're going to get into it in all seriousness with a whole range of tracks ranging from the benign to the outright, completely apocalyptically hyperactive and insane. Stuff today by Scatterbrain, 24/7 Spies, Faith No More, lesser known British funk metal bands like Scat Opera and Ignorance, and a ton of others. You are listening to Roots. This is your weekly metal history lesson. And each and every week we look at a different subgenre, a different style like this, or sometimes a different country, a different key figure or monumental turning point in the history of metal. I would argue this is, although it was a transitional kind of music, it's something that a lot of bands got into, started experimenting with funk right around 1987. It was kind of used up and put by the wayside by the early 1990s, or it evolved. And now when people look back in the early 1990s, they only want to think about the Florida death metal scene, the Swedish death metal scene, the rise of black metal, much more serious, gory, tough guy approach to music, I guess. But even with the revival of thrash metal over the last 10 years, you might think, what happened to all the thrash metal bands around 1987? Well, a lot of them started playing funk covers. We'll hear that today from San Francisco Bay Area bands Mordred and Exodus. Both of those bands, of course, from the San Francisco Bay Area, the area that gave birth to Faith No More, one of the most truly original and genre-breaking bands of the late 1980s, especially their album Introduce Yourself on Slash Records, breaking down the walls between rock, metal, disco, rap, and funk metal. The embrace of Faith No More by Metallica, James Hetfield wearing that Faith No More t-shirt on the 598 EP in 1987. That wasn't Hetfield starting a trend. That was just him as a music fan on the Bay Area metal scene, doing what all his friends are doing. I mean, look, you had this band Blind Illusion that had been around for almost 10 years. They made an excellent thrash metal masterpiece called The Sane Asylum on Combat Records. But within a year, the guitarist, Larry Lalonde, who had also been in Possessed, and the bass player, Les Claypool, went off and pursued this other band, Primus, that, of course, has gone on to be taken funk metal to the realm of outer impossibilities. Pretty soon, you had Exodus recording a funk metal cover of a band called War from the Bay Area. We're going to hear Primus, Exodus's funk metal foray in a minute, something by classic Faith No More from the Introduce Yourself record. But just going back into the roots of where funk came from, you of course have James Brown running the tightest band in show business for decades, laying down the pattern for funk that was lifted by everybody from David Bowie to James Chance and the Contortions. And then out of Detroit in the 1970s, you had this very creative, masterful kind of funk orchestra called Parliament Funkadelic. A guy named George Clinton was the mastermind behind this big collective of characters in wild outfits, bass-slapping behemoths like Bootsy Collins. And in 1970, the same year that Black Sabbath released its debut, and out of the Detroit came the Funkadelic album, Maggot Brain, kind of a collusion of hard rock and hard funk that you've just got to call square one for funk metal. Tracks coming up by Primus, Exodus, Faith No More, Mr. Bungle. I'm Ian Christie. This is your weekly metal history lesson. Today, looking at the roots of funk metal on SiriusXM.
guns in their hands. Too many puppies in foreign lands. I guess I'm shopping soon, something and things on the war machine. Too many puppies, not just like me. Too many puppies, not afraid to see the vision that I'm about to fuck to life again. Too many puppies, too many dead men.
From the pages of Sound of the Beast, your weekly heavy metal history lesson with Ian Christie. Liquid Metal!
All my friends on a low rider. A low rider is a little higher.
Yeah, Faith No More back there with deceased former singer Chuck Mosley off the awesome Introduce Yourself record. And then the next Faith No More singer, the guy that stuck with them for the next couple of decades, Mike Patton and his band, Mr. Bungle. Those two bands kind of fusing together to form a giant musical legacy, but really the door opening up during this period of huge interest in funk metal. This is Roots, your weekly metal history lesson, and today we're looking at funk metal, this bizarre kind of conglomeration of styles and attitudes that came really big on the scene around 1987 and really played itself out over the next 5 or 6 years, leading to a lot of bands with major label deals and leading to an evolution of music that paved the way for nu metal in the late 1990s. But even before that, something like, I guess you'd call it alternative metal, right? This kind of groovy hard rock sound that bands like Mindfunk were purveyors of throughout the middle parts of the 1990s. So far, pretty much focused on the thrash metal side of things. There was just already a really physical feel to what thrash metal was doing. They had adopted stage diving and slamming from punk rock, and all of a sudden you're kind of making dance music. You're trying to get these big, fat, chunky grooves together. Today, in hardcore, it would be a breakdown. Back in the late 1980s, it was just about getting this like mosh part together that would send the pit crazy. Well, at the same time, you started looking around, you had these bands like there were a lot of punk bands that had the funk influence, like the previously mentioned Red Hot Chili Peppers in the early days, and it wasn't such a stretch to see that for metalheads to look over that tiny thin fence. They're playing the same venues anyway, you know, it could be Creator on a Monday night, Red Hot Chili Peppers on a Tuesday night, and say, whoa, okay, let's kind of like, this is kind of interesting. Let's see what's going on. Not to mention there was rap music growing all around, stuff like the early Public Enemy, NWA. This maybe unlikely crossover between metal and funk started to make a lot of sense musically, culturally, and, you know, just in terms of creatively creating something brand new. We've already heard two bands that began as thrash metal opening acts, basically Faith No More and Primus, that have gone on to be platinum selling huge legacy bands in American rock music. It's almost hard to imagine that Anthrax never crossed over fully and did a song with slap bass. But on the other hand, they were differently invested, I guess, being a New York band with rap music and forging this new kind of rap metal parallel path in their spare time, in their collaborations with UTFO and Public Enemy. Rap metal, I would say, is a little bit different. Obviously, there's rapping going on, and a lot of this funk metal stuff, it's still singing. It still takes its energy and inspiration from 1970s and classic metal, and then mashes it together to create something I think really unique. Whether or not it deserves higher respect in the vast hierarchy of metal genres, maybe not, but it definitely has its place. And I'm glad that you're with me here today for this fun frolic through the park of late 80s, early 90s funk metal. Tracks to come by a couple of British bands, Scat Opera and Ignorance. Now, in terms of thrash metal, I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's national pride or anything, but in terms of thrash metal, Britain was behind the United States. However, in this funk metal sweepstakes, I think they had some very good entries, probably because the fusion of dance and rock music was already happening on a big scale in England with bands like Pop Will Eat Itself in the beginning of the Manchester scene and Zodiac, Mind Warp, whatever. There was a lot of rock dancing going on in the UK. The thrash metal bands that tried to capitalize on that, I think, did pretty well for themselves. We've also got, the most extreme thrash metal funk crossover from the Bay Area by a band called Mordred that actually brought on a guy named DJ Pause to do on-stage turntable scratching with them, which I think is unique in thrash metal, especially for the late 1980s. Stuff by Sweaty Nipples, a band that formed out of Wehrmacht from the Portland, Oregon speedcore scene. Something by 24/7 Spies, a majority black New York City band that were label mates with Agnostic Front and Sick of It All. So a bunch of bands from around the world here that are beyond just simply putting funk parts into thrash metal songs. These guys are taking playing funky rock, I guess. They're taking it one step further, starting maybe more around the end of the 1980s to the early 1990s, starting with this New York City band Scatterbrain, formed from the ashes of crossover legends Ludachrist. This is Ian Christie on Roots of Funk Metal on SiriusXM.
Here's my story, sad but true, about a girl that I once knew. She broke my heart, I became unglued. It all started when she called me dude. Today I leave the psycho ward, my sentence didn't conclude. I killed a man with my bare hands because he called me dude. So I said that I was insane, temporarily insane, brain strain. And I said I made no peace, style a new life today. This story starts years ago as I'm fishing by the sea. In California sunshine, just me and my baby. Lost in those feelings that high, when a big long light dog walked by. Looked at her, she looked at him, I knew it was mine. Took her by the hand, kicked sand in my face. She looked, she laughed, she said later, they were gone without a trace. Took her by the hand, kicked sand in my face. Took her by the hand, kicked sand in my face. They walked away without a trace. And the waves echoed her laughter and her words. See you later, dude. Hey, dude, don't call me dude. Don't call me dude. Hey, dude. Don't call me dude. Later that night, I was in such a bad mood. I was sitting in a bar, drinking hard, getting stewed, thinking about the girl and how about I've been screwed. When some guy walks in, sits next to me, says, "What's up, dude?" Dude. I heard the word dude and I became unglued. Slowly I turned, step by step, inch by inch, step by step, by inch by inch, by step by step, by inch by inch, step by step, step by step, by step by step, by step by step, by step by inch. I put my head on my neck and I sway. Don't call me dude. Don't call me dude. Hey dude. Hey dude. Don't do it. Don't call me dude. Dude. Hey dude. Don't call me dude. Don't call me dude. Hey dude. Don't call me dude. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't call me dude. So that's how I got where I am. But this ain't where it ends. The doctors said they cured me. I said goodbye to my crazy friends. I was smiling as I left that place. My life had been renewed. The guard at the gate, he stamped my pass and he said, "Yo later, dude." Yo later, dude. Oh, dude. Oh no.
lesson with Ian Christie. Bloody Roots. Liquid Metal!
She's a very kinky girl, the kind you don't mean no to mother. She will never let your spirits down once you get off the street. Like the boys in the band, she says that I'm her ultimate favorite. When I make my move, you hate her at the right time. She's never hard to please. Ha, he's not for me. That girl's pretty fun now. That girl's a super freak. That guy that you read about in New Wave magazines. That girl's pretty kinky. That girl's a super freak. I really love to taste her every time we meet. She's alright. She's alright. That girl's alright with me. Yeah. She's a super freak. Super freak. She's super freaking out. She's a very special girl. From my head down to her toenails. She'll be waiting for me backstage with her girlfriends in a limousine. We start a crowd to her, she says. On 714 I'll be tripping. When I get there, she's got intertwining candles. What a freaky scene. That girl's really wild now. That girl's a super freak. The kind of guy you read about in New Wave magazines. That girl's pretty kinky. That girl's a super freak. I really love to taste her every time we meet. She's alright. She's alright. That girl's alright with me. Yeah. Ears of the dumb and the eyes of the blind. Now hear me and see as the rainbows of light glisten free. I'm gonna drift up into the stars one day, into a land of make-believe. I'll take my time, I've made my mind. Now listen please, as I crack like this. Hey! Come my way, the light has given way. Try this way, skies have given shade. Like a lion, stand up, happy boy. Hear us laugh, we have no other choice. So easy to believe, for me, just give it a try. Open up your mind and let me pour in mine. See the light, you can taste the power. See what you wanna see and see it grow stronger, much stronger. It never grows weak, it never grows wide. Come my way, the light has given way. Try this way, skies have given shade. Like a lion, stand up, happy boy. Hear us laugh, we have no other choice. Gonna stand on the moon, be the man on the moon, like a giant spotlight shining on me. As I smile at whose world, whose world. I'll take my time and I've made my mind. Now listen please, listen up as I crash. Crash like the fire. Come away, now the light has given way. Try this way, the skies have given shade. Like a light, with a sound of happy boy. Hear us laugh, we have no other choice. Come away, now the light has given way. Try this way, the skies have given shade. Like a light, with a sound of happy boy. Hear us laugh, we have no other choice.
From the pages of your heavy metal history lesson. Bloody Roots. Liquid Metal!
Crazy waves on the street is a freak show. I tried to change as I was day one. That's what I said to myself. But if I try too hard, I'm right back on that side. Again, again, again. You think you won this race? I sit. My desolate room. No lights. No music. Just ever. Killed everyone. I'm away forever. But I'm feeling better. What do I feel? What do I say? Fuck you, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? Fuck you, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. How do I feel? What do I say? In the end, it all goes away. 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 In the end, it all goes away.
And there it is. You've been listening to Funk Metal for an hour. You get 2 minutes of System of a Down from their early days. And what can you say? Is it anything but painfully obvious where System of a Down's roots lie? And the same story for Korn. Except for the vocals, it's painfully obvious that these guys grew up listening to the bands that we played today here on Roots of Funk Metal. Thanks for joining me for this metal history lesson. I realize that when you look back at 1988, 1992, the only thing on everybody's minds are classic Slayer records, Napalm Death, Morbid Angel, the first records by Emperor and Mayhem. Nothing but the utmost seriousness and hard-headedness of purpose. Well, today hopefully blew the lid off of all of that. And who knows, maybe the 10-year run of the rebirth of thrash metal will end the same way that the original thrash metal wave ended, with a whole flurry of funk metal bands. Today's playlist, it's online at roots.bazillionpoints.com. Please check out bazillionpoints.com for the ultimate reading stash. Harden your metal mind to post-nuclear capabilities with thousands upon thousands of first-person photographs and writing in books like Sound of the Beast, The Complete Headbanging History of Heavy Metal, Swedish Death Metal, Murder in the Front Row, Dirty Deeds, We Got Power, NYHC, and much, much more. It's all at bazillionpoints.com. Thank you for your support. Like I said, today's playlist, it's at roots.bazillionpoints.com. I'm leaving you not with more examples of how funk metal influenced nu metal, because that is all too painfully obvious, and there are hundreds of nu metal bands that basically form their own point on the vast evolution of metal music. I'm taking a very insane Japanese over-the-top multi-genre band that has funk metal as a primary element along with slam death metal. Check these guys out. Maximum the Hormone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ian Christie. This has been Roots of Funk Metal on SiriusXM.
Unstoppable!
You just heard Ian Christie's Bloody Roots, Liquid Metal's hour-long crash course in headbanger history.